Have you ever boarded a flight only to realize you're being judged before you even sit down? What if one quiet moment of humiliation set off a chain of events that would shake an entire company and inspire a movement? Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The morning heat pressed heavy against the glass walls of Port Grand International Airport in Houston, Texas. Even inside, with the hum of the air conditioning, the sticky weight of summer clung to the skin. Travelers bustled past one another, rolling suitcases trailing like obedient pets, the sharp scent of coffee and tired cologne mixing in the air. Amara Ellison shifted her backpack higher onto her shoulder and moved with the current of the crowd. She wore a simple white button-up shirt neatly pressed and a pair of worn blue jeans. Nothing flashy. Nothing that screamed who she was. Just another face in the sea of people, or so she hoped. At 19, Amara was no stranger to airports or to being underestimated. Being the daughter of Dominic Ellison, one of the wealthiest private investors in the country, meant she had long grown accustomed to side glances, raised eyebrows, and polite disbelief. But this trip was hers alone. She was on her way to New York to represent her father's firm at an investment summit. It was her first solo responsibility, and she intended to make him proud. Clutching her boarding pass, she double-checked the gate number and class. Flight 207, SilverWing Airways, business class, priority boarding. She smiled a little, a private smile meant to steel her nerves. She could do this. She would do this. The boarding area buzzed with a low thrum of announcements and murmured conversations. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed. The smell of buttery croissants wafted from a nearby coffee stand. It should have been comforting, but Amara felt a bead of unease slip down her spine. She shook it off. When they called for business class to board, Amara moved forward with the others, her heart tapping a steady rhythm against her ribs. Just as she stepped up to the gate agent, a sharp voice cut across the low hum. "Excuse me, young lady," said a woman, crisp and practiced, like she was used to being obeyed. Amara turned to see a flight attendant standing a few feet away, immaculately dressed, hair pulled so tight it looked painful, her name tag reading Rhonda Vexley. The woman's smile was polite, but the eyes gave her away. Cool, measuring, a flicker of something judgmental lurking just beneath. "Are you sure you're in the right boarding group?" Rhonda asked, her voice pitched just loud enough for people nearby to hear. Heat prickled at the back of Amara's neck. She felt the weight of eyes turning toward her. A few curious, a few amused. "Yes, ma'am," Amara said quietly, extending her ticket. Rhonda took it with 2 fingers, like it might bite her. Her gaze darted from the name to Amara's face, to her jeans and simple backpack. Her mouth tightened. "This is business class boarding," Rhonda said, voice cool, almost scolding. Amara forced a small smile. "I know. That's my seat." For a long, thick moment, Rhonda simply stared at her, lips pursed. A man, a few steps back, chuckled under his breath. Another woman leaned toward her husband and whispered something behind a manicured hand. Amara's hands tightened around the strap of her backpack. Finally, Rhonda handed the boarding pass back, but her eyes didn't soften. Instead, she gave a curt nod toward the jet bridge. "Fine," she said, "but I'll be verifying your ticket once you're seated." Amara nodded and moved quickly, cheeks burning. Every step toward the plane felt heavier, like wading through syrup. She found a row and stowed her backpack carefully, sliding into the plush leather seat by the window. She barely had time to exhale before a shadow fell across her. She looked up to see Rhonda standing over her, holding a small device in her hand. "Miss," Rhonda said sharply, her voice carrying well beyond their row, "I'm going to have to ask you to step off the aircraft. There seems to be an issue with your reservation." A cold fist clenched around Amara's heart. "There must be a mistake. I have my ticket right here." "I'm sure you think you do," Rhonda said, the barest sneer on her lips. Around them, heads turned. Murmurs rippled through the cabin like a pebble dropped into a pond. Someone sked under their breath. Another passenger gave a little snort. Amara's mouth went dry. Her fingers fumbled for the boarding pass she had tucked into her pocket. She held it out, but Rhonda barely glanced at it. "This isn't about your piece of paper," Rhonda said, voice low but dripping with condescension. "It's about the standards we expect in this cabin." The meaning behind her words landed like a slap. Amara rose on shaky legs, grabbing her backpack. The leather seat creaked as she stood. For a second, she thought about arguing, about demanding she be treated with the respect her ticket and her humanity deserved. But when she looked around at the rows of strangers, at the subtle disdain in their eyes, her courage crumpled in on itself. She walked down the aisle with her head high, even though her stomach twisted and her vision blurred. Each step away from her seat felt like another stone heaped on her back. Her hands clutched the backpack so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Behind her, the chatter swelled like a wave. No one stopped her. No one stood up. The doors to the plane loomed ahead like the gates of exile. Amara sat hunched in one of the stiff leather chairs near the boarding gates, her backpack clutched tightly against her chest like a shield. Around her, the airport buzzed on, indifferent. Wheelie bags rattled across the tiled floors, announcements echoed overhead, and the smell of burnt coffee floated through the air. But inside her own small world, everything had gone still. Her heart beat against her ribs, not in panic now, but in something deeper, something heavier. She stared at nothing, blinking slowly. Her mind kept replaying the scene on the plane, the low, almost gleeful murmur of strangers watching her humiliation. She had done everything right. She had the ticket, she had the right to be there. And still, it hadn't mattered. It never really mattered. She thought back to when she was younger, sitting in fancy restaurants where waiters would automatically hand the check to her white tutor instead of her. Or those job fairs where interviewers would glance at her resume, impressed by her achievements, but look up at her face and hesitate. No matter how many accolades she stacked, no matter how carefully she spoke, some people would always see her skin before her worth. Her fingers gripped the strap of her bag tighter. A part of her wanted to storm back onto that plane, demand an apology, make a scene that no one could ignore. Another part, the part she hated, whispered that maybe it was easier to just take the hit and move on. She was tired of fighting battles no one else even seemed to see. Might as well have a sign around my neck, she thought bitterly, saying not good enough. The seat beside her creaked slightly. She blinked and turned her head. A man had settled next to her, not too close, his posture cautious. He wore a neat SilverWing Airways uniform, press slacks, navy blazer, a badge glinting on his lapel. His salt and pepper hair was cropped short, and there was a certain heaviness in his eyes, like someone who had seen too much and stopped pretending it didn't weigh on him. "Excuse me, miss," he said gently, his voice a warm, weathered rumble. "Are you all right?" Amara almost laughed. No, she wasn't all right, but she swallowed that down. "I'm fine," she said, a little too quickly. He gave a small nod, like he understood the lie for what it was. "Name's Calvin. Calvin Broom," he added, glancing at her boarding pass, still clenched in her hand. I saw what happened back there." Amara didn't answer. What was there to say? She had no interest in another half-hearted apology on behalf of a system too broken to fix. Calvin shifted awkwardly. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "You shouldn't have been treated that way. Not here. Not anywhere." Something in his tone made her look up, really look at him. He wasn't making excuses. He wasn't brushing it off. There was a sincere regret in his face that disarmed her more than anger could have. After a beat, Calvin leaned forward slightly. "May I see your ticket again?" Wordlessly, Amara handed it over. He studied it, his brow furrowing. "Business class," he muttered, almost to himself. "You were right where you belonged." Amara pressed her lips together. A small, traitorous swell of relief filled her chest. She had known it. She hadn't imagined it. She wasn't crazy. Calvin handed the pass back. "Listen, if you'll let me, I'll get you back on that plane." Before Amara could even nod, a sharp voice sliced through the air. "Is there a problem here?" Rhonda Vexley stood a few feet away, arms crossed over her chest, her expression tight. She wasn't smiling now. Her gaze flicked from Calvin to Amara, her mouth tightening further. "No problem," Calvin said, standing. "Just clearing up a misunderstanding." Rhonda stepped closer, voice low but seething. "That young lady caused a disruption. We have standards to maintain." Amara felt her stomach knot. Here it was again, the invisible accusation she couldn't disprove. Calvin's jaw ticked. "She has a valid ticket." "Standards," Rhonda repeated, her tone colder than the terminal's air conditioning. The tension stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Around them, a few travelers paused, sensing the charged atmosphere, but wisely moving along. After a long moment, Calvin backed down, lifting his hands in a slow, peacekeeping gesture. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll sort it out another way." Rhonda gave a stiff nod and pivoted sharply on her heel, disappearing into the stream of passengers. Calvin turned back to Amara, his face pinched with frustration. He lowered his voice. "Would you mind coming with me for a bit? There's a lounge nearby. Safer there." Amara hesitated. Something in her chest urged her to trust him, even if every defense mechanism screamed otherwise. As they walked toward the SilverWing VIP lounge, Calvin glanced sideways at her. "Forgive me for asking," he said carefully, "but are you Amara Ellison? From Ellison Capital?" Amara stopped short, blinking up at him. "How do you know that?" Calvin gave a half smile, half grimace. "Because if you are, there's a whole storm about to hit this place, and they don't even know it yet." For the first time that morning, a flicker of power, real, undeniable, stirred inside her. "Yeah," she said quietly. "That's me." Calvin exhaled, like a man who'd just seen the first sign of land after a long, bad voyage. "Good," he said. "Stay close. We're going to fix this." The VIP lounge at Port Grand International was a far cry from the noisy terminal, but Amara felt no comfort there. She sat stiffly in a corner chair, her backpack hugged tightly against her chest like it was the only thing keeping her anchored. People moved around her, polished shoes clicking on the marble floor, muted conversations blending with the clinking of coffee cups. No one paid her any mind. It was like she had already disappeared from view, pushed to the side, as if she didn't belong. She stared blankly at the polished glass walls, watching planes taxi in the distance. The shame clung to her skin, thick and heavy. She could still feel it, the way strangers had looked at her, the unspoken agreement that she was the one at fault, that she must have done something wrong to deserve being marched off the plane. Her fingers dug into the fabric of her backpack. A part of her wanted to scream, to tell them all exactly who she was. But another part, the bigger part, knew it wouldn't change a thing. She had been judged before she had spoken a word. A door at the far end of the lounge swung open. Amara's stomach tightened instinctively. Rhonda Vexley entered, her expression carefully blank, a security officer trailing a step behind her. The officer was a thick-set man, his uniform crisp, his face unreadable. Rhonda carried a clipboard in one hand, her heels clicking sharply with each step. Amara rose halfway from her seat before she caught herself. She didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. Rhonda approached, her smile professional but brittle. "Miss," she said, voice smooth but cold, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave this area. It's reserved for verified VIP guests, and there seems to be a discrepancy with your documentation." Amara stared at her, disbelief flashing in her chest. She pulled out her boarding pass and ID from her bag, holding them out with trembling hands. "My documents are valid," she said, her voice low but steady. Rhonda barely glanced at them. "There's been a report," she continued, tilting her head in a way that made it sound like she was sorry, though her eyes betrayed no real regret. "Until it's cleared up, you'll need to wait elsewhere." The security officer shifted his stance, making it clear that this wasn't a suggestion. Amara's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to demand why no one else in the lounge was being scrutinized. But the words stuck like thorns. She thought about raising her voice, about making a scene. But would anyone believe her version of events? Would they see a determined young woman standing up for herself, or just another angry black girl causing trouble? Her chest burned with humiliation. Without a word, She stuffed her documents back into her bag and rose from the chair, her movements stiff. As she walked toward the exit, the lounge seemed to grow quieter, like the air itself was holding its breath. She refused to look around. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Out in the wide corridor of the airport, Amara paused, blinking hard against the hot sting behind her eyes. She hated this, the way a handful of strangers could make her feel small, worthless, invisible. A commotion to her left snapped her attention back. A group of men in dark suits moved briskly through the crowd, cutting a clean path through the travelers. Their movements were coordinated, purposeful. In the center of the cluster, a tall man in a sleek black suit scanned the area with sharp, hawk-like eyes. Before Amara could process what was happening, the men surrounded her in a protective circle. One of them, a younger man with an earpiece tucked behind his ear, leaned in slightly. "Miss Ellison," he said, respectful but firm, "please come with us." Amara blinked, stunned. She nodded slowly, allowing herself to be guided back toward the VIP lounge, only this time not as someone being pushed out, but as someone important. The people in the lounge turned to look as the group re-entered. Whispers broke out. A man dropped his coffee cup with a sharp crack. Even the staff behind the polished granite bar froze for a moment, eyes wide. Rhonda Vexley stood near the entrance, her clipboard forgotten in her hand. Her face drained of color as recognition set in. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The leader of the security team stepped forward and spoke briefly with the lounge manager, who quickly scurried off to clear a private room. Amara didn't need to say a word. The scene spoke for itself. Where a moment ago she had been an outsider, an intruder to be removed quietly and without fuss, now she was someone to be deferred to, someone they should have treated with respect from the beginning. Across the room, Calvin Broom appeared, walking briskly toward her. His face was set with something new, a grim determination that hadn't been there before. He stopped a few feet away, giving her a small nod. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Amara hesitated, then gave the smallest shrug. She didn't trust her voice yet. Calvin's jaw tightened. He turned to look at Rhonda, who still hadn't moved, and then back at Amara. "You need to know something," he said, his voice low, but cutting through the tension like a blade. "This wasn't just a mistake. She didn't just insult you. She might have just cost SilverWing its future." Amara's heart hammered in her chest. The stakes, she realized, had just changed completely. And the real fight was only beginning. The conference room deep inside SilverWing Airways' executive wing felt like a pressure cooker about to blow. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their cold glow pooling across the long oak table where Calvin Broom sat alongside a handful of SilverWing's top brass. Across from him, stiff-backed and stone-faced, sat Rhonda Vexley, her arms neatly folded in front of her. No one spoke. The only sound was the soft shuffle of papers and the occasional, uncomfortable cough. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty. It was loaded, teetering on the edge of collapse. Calvin leaned back in his chair, studying the faces around the table. He could see it clear as day, panic, guilt, and a desperate scramble for someone to blame. And it wasn't just about Amara Ellison anymore. No, this had grown beyond one young woman being mistreated. This was about the future of the airline itself. A middle-aged man in a dark blue suit cleared his throat and broke the silence. "We've just received word," he said, voice tight, "that Dominic Ellison will be holding a press conference this afternoon." He let the words hang there, heavy with implication. "At 2:00, the man continued, glancing meaningfully at Rhonda. "He's expected to announce that Ellison Capital will be withdrawing its investment, every last cent. $500 million. Gone in a single stroke." Rhonda's carefully composed expression cracked. Her eyes flicked to Calvin, to the other executives, searching for an ally. She opened her mouth as if to defend herself, but no one was looking at her anymore. The mood had shifted. Now, she wasn't the enforcer of standards, she was the liability. Calvin laced his fingers together and rested them on the table. He didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction to be found in watching a person crumble. But there was a grim sense of justice, cold and clean. Meanwhile, in a smaller, more private conference room across the hall, Amara sat opposite her father. Dominic Ellison was a towering presence even seated, his tailored suit immaculate, his gaze sharp and assessing. He wasn't angry, not in the shouting, red-faced way. His fury was something quieter, something that chilled the air around him. Amara twisted her hands in her lap, feeling the weight of his attention. "You tell me, Amara," Dominic said, his voice even. "What do you want to do?" It wasn't a question meant to comfort. It was an invitation and a responsibility. He laid out the options plainly. They could sue the airline. They could demand Rhonda's immediate dismissal. They could drag SilverWing's name through every court and news cycle in the country. They had the money, the influence, and the lawyers to make it hurt. Amara looked down at her hands, at the faint half-moons her nails had pressed into her palms. Every instinct in her screamed for retribution. She wanted them to feel even a fraction of the humiliation she had felt. She wanted them to understand the damage they had done, not just to her, but to every young black woman who had been told, subtly or otherwise, that they didn't belong. But another thought crept in, quieter but stronger. Would dragging them down really change anything? Or would it just be another headline, another scandal that people forgot about the next time a bigger story broke? She thought about the faces she had seen growing up, the young kids in underfunded schools, the students who gave up on dreams before they even had a chance to start because they knew, deep down, the deck was stacked against them. She thought about what her father had built, not just with his money, but with his name, with the idea that someone like him could succeed without waiting for permission. Taking down SilverWing might feel good for a moment, but it wouldn't build anything lasting. Slowly, Amara lifted her head. Her voice was steady when she spoke. "I have a different idea," she said. "I don't just want to punish them. I want to make sure something better comes out of this." Dominic studied her, his face unreadable. Then, after a long beat, he nodded once. "All right," he said. "Tell me what you have in mind." Amara exhaled, feeling the knot in her chest loosen just a little. For the first time since stepping onto that cursed plane, she felt like she was steering her own course again. Whatever came next, it wouldn't be about revenge. It would be about hope. And that made all the difference. The air at Port Grand International Airport buzzed with an energy that felt almost electric. Travelers paused mid-stride to check their phones, news alerts lighting up screens everywhere. Headlines flashed in bold letters. SilverWing Airways accused of racial discrimination. Photos of Amara, grainy and hurried, began circulating online. Some showed her standing alone with her backpack clutched to her chest. Others showed her walking off the plane, her face composed but pale. The story had cracked open, and now it was spreading like wildfire. Amara sat quietly in a private room adjacent to the VIP lounge. Her father's security team posted discreetly outside the door. She could hear the low rumble of reporters gathering near the terminal entrance, smell the faint tang of stress and cheap coffee drifting in from the hall. Inside her chest, two storms raged. One voice, loud and furious, urged her to strike back, to sue, to name names, to expose every slight, every injustice, to make SilverWing bleed in courtrooms and headlines and shareholder meetings, to make them feel the humiliation they had so casually handed her. But another voice, quieter but deeper, pulled her in a different direction. It spoke not of punishment, but of purpose, of doing something that would outlast a single news cycle, of using the power she now had, not just to settle a score, but to build something better. She pressed her hands flat against the table, steadying herself. Across the room, Dominic Ellison stood near the window, speaking in low tones to their lead attorney. The man was sharp, aggressive, already outlining a multi-phase legal assault. Amara knew he meant well. He wanted to protect her, to defend the family name. But she also knew that fighting fire with fire wouldn't fix what was broken. And somewhere inside, she realized she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. The door cracked open, and Calvin Broom slipped inside, his face drawn tight with worry. "You need to see this," he said, holding out his phone. Amara took it, her fingers brushing his for a second. On the screen played a short, shaky video taken from a passenger's perspective. The grainy footage showed her standing in the plane aisle, clutching her backpack, Rhonda's sharp voice cutting across the cabin. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Rhonda snapped in the video, her tone dripping with condescension. Then came the part where she ordered Amara off the plane, loud enough for everyone to hear, no regard for dignity or respect. Amara's own small figure on the screen seemed both heartbreakingly young and unbreakably strong. Beneath the video, comments flooded in by the hundreds, then thousands. Outrage, support, calls for boycotts. SilverWing's name dragged through the mud. Amara exhaled slowly, handing the phone back. The clip had gone viral. Dominic crossed the room, sensing the shift. His voice was low but steady. "We move now," he said. "We hit them hard. Lawsuits. Press. Make an example." Amara nodded, feeling the weight of it settle on her shoulders. But she also saw something else, a crossroads. She could burn it all down, or she could light a different kind of fire. She reached into her bag and pulled out the speech she had written earlier that morning, before everything exploded. It had been simple then, just a few polite remarks for a business summit. Now it felt hollow, irrelevant. She turned the paper over and stared at the blank side. Her hand trembled only slightly as she picked up a pen. Outside the door, the clamor grew louder. Reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing. Amara smoothed the paper against the table, inhaled deeply, and began to write. Not about vengeance, not about anger, about vision, about a future where no one would have to wonder if they belonged. Minutes later, she stood outside the double doors leading to the makeshift press conference. The SilverWing banner hung on one side of the room, a podium waiting under the harsh buzz of fluorescent lights. Amara could feel the stares through the glass, reporters craning for a glimpse, executives whispering urgently, strangers wondering who she was and what she would say. In her hand, the fresh speech felt heavy with meaning. Her heart raced, but not from fear, from knowing that what she did next would matter, not just today, not just for her, but for so many others. Amara squared her shoulders. This wasn't about payback. This was about power, the right kind of power, the kind you use to lift others, not crush them. And she was ready to claim it. The conference room had been transformed into a battleground of flashing lights and hurried whispers. Reporters packed into every inch of the space, cameras perched on shoulders, microphones stretching like vines toward the empty podium. The air was thick, not just with anticipation, but with something electric, something bigger than any one headline could capture. Amara stood just behind the heavy doors, her hands resting loosely at her sides. The speech she had scrawled earlier sat tucked into her pocket, but she didn't reach for it. She didn't need it. Her heart already knew the words she needed to say. Dominic Ellison was a silent figure off to the right, arms crossed, his gaze steady. There was pride there, sure, but more than that, trust. He wasn't here to control the moment. He was here to bear witness. The event coordinator gave her a small nod, and the doors swung open. A wave of noise hit her first, camera shutters, murmurs, the buzz of energy vibrating in her bones. Amara moved through it, her steps even, her spine straight. She mounted the few steps to the stage and took her place behind the podium. For a long breath, she simply stood there, letting the room settle, letting the world look at her, and really see her. When she finally spoke, her voice carried without trembling. "My name is Amara Ellison," she began. "And a few days ago, I was just another passenger trying to board a flight." The room hushed, the noise falling away like dust. "I was treated unfairly. I was judged before I had a chance to sit down. Not because of my ticket, not because of my behavior, but because of assumptions rooted in something so deeply ingrained that sometimes people don't even realize it's there." She paused, scanning the faces before her. Some nodded, some frowned, all listened. "But today," she continued, "is not about pointing fingers. It's not about tearing down. It's about building up." A murmur moved through the room, soft and surprised. "I'm proud to announce the creation of the SilverWing Foundation," Amara said, her voice gaining strength. a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting students of color who aspire to work in the airline industry, whether as pilots, flight attendants, engineers, or leaders. A ripple of camera clicks followed. "We cannot change every mind overnight," she said. "But we can open doors. We can create pathways. We can build a future where no one is told, silently or otherwise, that they don't belong." She stepped back slightly from the podium, giving space for her father. Dominic approached, his presence commanding yet calm. He took the microphone with the ease of a man used to boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. But today, his words felt personal. "Effective immediately," he said, his voice steady. "Ellison Capital will withdraw our pending investment from SilverWing Airways." Gasps fluttered through the crowd, reporters scrambling to capture every syllable. "But," Dominic continued, raising a hand to still the noise, "we are offering an alternative. Instead of litigation and endless court battles, we propose a solution." He outlined it clearly. SilverWing would contribute an initial endowment to the SilverWing Foundation, equivalent to the fines they would have faced in penalties and settlements. The airline's reputation would take a hit, but by embracing change, they had a chance to rebuild with integrity. There was a beat of stunned silence, and then an eruption of questions, flashbulbs exploding like fireworks. Amara stood to the side, letting the moment belong to itself. She had made her choice, not to punish, but to plant something that might someday outgrow even her own reach. After the conference ended, Amara pushed through the glass doors into the sunlight outside. Reporters still shouted her name, cameras still flashed, but it felt different now. She wasn't shrinking under the weight of their gaze. She was standing in it. A group of young girls leaned against the security barrier, waving excitedly. One wore a backpack slung over her shoulder, just like Amara's. Amara smiled and waved back. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the future felt wide open, not just for her, but for all the others who would come after. And she was ready to meet it head-on. The official press conference from SilverWing Airways didn't have the glitz or bravado of the last one. There were no flashy banners or scripted boasts. Only a somber podium set against a plain backdrop with the company logo printed neatly at the top. A middle-aged spokesperson, voice heavy with carefully measured regret, announced the decision plainly. Effective immediately, SilverWing Airways has terminated its relationship with Rhonda Vexley due to violations of our ethical conduct policy. We are committed to building a more inclusive and respectful environment for all our customers. There was no applause, no cheers, just a low murmur among the gathered reporters, like the slow shifting of stones after an earthquake. The consequences had finally arrived. Rhonda Vexley's name was already plastered across headlines and social media threads, each one peeling back the carefully constructed facade she had built over her career. Within hours, she had lost not only her position, but the trust she had spent decades cultivating. Her resignation letter, leaked shortly after, offered a formal apology. In it, she admitted something few expected to see in print. "I allowed unconscious bias to shape my actions in ways I deeply regret. I take full responsibility for the harm caused." It wasn't perfect. It didn't erase the hurt. But it was a crack in the wall, a rare acknowledgement that change didn't start by pretending there was nothing wrong. Later that afternoon, by pure coincidence or maybe fate, Amara crossed paths with Rhonda one final time. The airport corridor stretched wide and bright with afternoon light, spilling through high windows. People flowed past, busy with their own lives. But in that moment, time seemed to slow around the two women. Rhonda stood alone, her luggage by her side, her posture stiff. There was a weariness about her now, a heavy, undeniable slump in her shoulders. She saw Amara approaching and flinched slightly, as if expecting a confrontation. Amara stopped a few feet away, studying her. For a heartbeat, neither said a word. Then Amara, her voice calm and steady, said, "I hope you find a way to see people with kinder eyes." Rhonda blinked, a flicker of something, shame, maybe, crossing her face. She gave a tiny nod, barely more than a dip of the chin. Then, wordlessly, she gathered her bags and disappeared into the moving river of travelers. Amara watched her go, feeling no triumph, no gloating sense of victory. Only a quiet, settled peace. The real work was just beginning. Back in the newly established SilverWing Foundation's temporary office, the applications had already started pouring in. Young people from every corner of the country, many writing about dreams they had tucked away, thinking they'd never have a chance. Now, they wrote with hope. Some talked about wanting to become pilots, soaring beyond every low expectation ever placed on them. Others dreamed of running airports, designing planes, or leading teams where fairness wasn't just a word in a handbook, but a lived reality. It was more than Amara had hoped for. And it was only the beginning. In the months that followed, other airlines took notice. Policies changed. Diversity programs, once treated like empty boxes to check, began to get serious funding and serious leadership. It wasn't perfect. Progress never was. But the needle was moving, and Amara knew she had helped push it. One crisp autumn morning, she boarded a commercial flight, this time as just another passenger, anonymous and free. She settled into her seat by the window, the worn leather familiar against her back. As the plane taxied down the runway, she glanced out at the endless blue stretching overhead. The engines roared, the nose of the plane lifting, and the ground fell away beneath her feet. Amara smiled, a small, private smile. She didn't feel out of place anymore. She had taken the worst kind of moment and planted something new in its ashes, something that would grow long after her name faded from headlines. Out the window, the sky yawned wide, welcoming, and Amara knew, deep down in her bones, that she hadn't just found her place. She had built it. The grand ballroom at the Houston Convention Center buzzed with energy, the kind that filled a room from the floorboards to the rafters. Rows upon rows of chairs had been set up, all filled now with faces young and eager, students from local colleges, high schools, community programs. Many of them shifted nervously, wide-eyed, clutching the small informational packets handed out at the door. It wasn't just another scholarship drive. For some, it felt like the first real invitation to dream. At the front of the room, a simple blue and silver banner hung over the stage. SilverWing Foundation, taking flight together. Amara stood behind the curtain, breathing in slow and steady. This time, there was no tremble in her hands, no pit of fear in her stomach. Today wasn't about surviving the moment. It was about building something that would last long after she stepped away from the microphone. When the host announced her name, the room broke into polite applause. Amara stepped out into the lights, her steps calm, her shoulders relaxed. She wore a simple dark blue dress, her natural curls tucked neatly back, but it wasn't her clothes or her poise that drew the crowd in. It was the quiet fire in her eyes. She reached the podium and took a breath, letting the room settle. "I want to tell you a story," she said, voice warm and steady. "But it's not just about me. It's about all of us." The room leaned in, caught by the simplicity of her tone. "A while ago," she continued, "I boarded a plane thinking it was just another day. I had a valid ticket, a place to be, and a future I was working hard to build. But to some people, I didn't look like I belonged." She let that truth land. No dramatics, just honesty. "I was treated unfairly," she said, pausing. "Not because of what I did, but because of what they thought they saw." She smiled a little, soft but unbroken. "But standing here today, I can tell you, I didn't create this foundation because I was angry. I didn't do it to prove them wrong. I did because there are too many voices that never even get a chance to be heard." A ripple of emotion moved through the crowd. Heads nodded, hands tightened on lapels and notebook edges. "I'm not here because I fought harder," Amara said. "I'm here because I had people who believed in me. And everyone deserves that." In one of the front rows, a young girl, barely 14, wiped a tear from her eye. Amara's gaze swept the room. "The SilverWing Foundation isn't about me," she said. "It's about the doors we can open for others. It's about making sure that when you walk into a room, you don't have to wonder if you belong. You'll know you do." She finished simply, her voice rich with meaning. "We can't change every mind, but we can change the way we light the path for those who come after us. The applause started softly at first, then grew into a standing ovation that shook the room. Amara stepped back, her heart swelling, not with pride, but with a deep, lasting peace. Later, away from the noise and celebration, Amara stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the airport just beyond downtown. The sun hung low, casting golden light over the runways, where planes lifted into the endless blue. In a quiet moment, she caught a glimpse of a news alert flashing across a nearby TV. Rhonda Vexley, once the symbol of her humiliation, had quietly joined a non-profit organization focused on anti-bias training in the service industry. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a miracle. But it was a start. Amara smiled to herself. Healing didn't happen all at once. Change didn't roar, it whispered, it nudged, it moved slow but sure. She turned back to the window, watching a plane rise into the sky, its silver body catching the light. She wasn't the scared girl with a crumpled boarding pass anymore. She was the architect of something bigger than herself. And as she watched the jet disappear into the bright, limitless sky, Amara Ellison whispered to herself, not as a prayer, but as a promise. Let's keep building. Sometimes, a single moment of unfairness can weigh us down, or it can lift us to build something greater than ourselves. Amara chose to rise, not through anger, but through hope, and maybe that's the real kind of strength we all need. What about you? How would you turn hurt into healing? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next journey we'll share together.